All right, everybody. So as we have already discussed plot in Monday's live session, I just want to give you guys an opportunity to practice identifying the different plot elements in a short story. So the short story we will be talking about today is called. All right, we have our plot elements here. We have the exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, and the resolution. The exposition is the part of the plot in which the reader is given important background information about the characters and the setting. So anytime you see the characters being introduced, the setting is introduced, and usually you'll have the conflict being introduced there. That is your exposition. It is setting up the story. Your rising action. This is a series of events that begin to occur as soon as the conflict is introduced. So what that means is you're going to see a couple of, the conflict will have already been introduced, but you'll see a couple of things like little problems that start to occur building up to your climax. And then the climax is the turning point and the moment of greatest tension in the story. So you could think of it as the moment where it has you on the edge of your seat. If you think about a movie, sometimes in an action film, when someone is like in the life or death battle for their side, good guys or bad guys, that point might have you on the edge of your seat because you don't know who's going to win. You could think of it as like being at the top of a roller coaster, right? You're about to go over the edge, but not quite. You just don't know which way it's going to go. So that is the climax, the turning point, and the moment of greatest tension. That leads us to the falling action. The falling action is where the tension is decreasing and all the loose ends are getting tied up and the conflict is beginning to get resolved. So you're not on the edge of your seat anymore. Things are starting to get cleared up, and that conflict is being resolved, especially when we get to the resolution. Now, this is the outcome of the events, and the conflict and the climax have been fully resolved. So you could call this like your happy ending if you'd like to. It doesn't always have to be a happy ending, but sometimes it can be shocking or striking, but it is the end of the story, and those loose ends are tied up. So in the story that we are about to read, I want you to try to identify the plot elements as we read the short story, The Sniper. Okay, I want you to write down these words and their definitions before you start the story, because I want you guys to understand what these words mean, because you're going to encounter them in the story, and I don't want you to get confused. These are big words. I'm not going to quiz you on them, but I do want you to have write them down. You will need them in a Schoology assignment later. So make sure you write them down before you move on. Pause the video if you have to. The first word is beleaguered. If you're beleaguered, that means that there's suffering or you're being subjected to constant or repeated trouble or harassment. Beleaguered. The second word is spasmodically. That is sudden outburst or sudden spasms of activity or energy. Parapet. A parapet is a low protective wall along the edge of a roof or bridge or balcony. Next, we have a turret. A turret is a small tower on top of a larger tower or a corner of a building or a wall. You probably have seen turrets like in movies, or if you've seen it like castles, they have turrets on top of them. Paroxysm. Paroxysm is a sudden attack or violent expression of a particular emotion or activity. I think I'm pronouncing that word correctly. I think it's a cool word, so you should incorporate it into your vocabulary in the future. Iodine. Iodine is a topical liquid that is used to treat wounds and keep them from getting infected. And then finally, remorse. Remorse is when you have a deep regret or deep guilt. Now remember, please write down these words and their definitions. You will need them later. Pause the video if you need to. Now, before we get into The Sniper, I want to go over kind of the background information that you need to have for this story, because there are going to be some words in there that are a bit unfamiliar to you, or have a different meaning today than they did back then. So you need to understand what some of these words mean. All right, so The Sniper by Liam Flaherty. I cannot say his name. I apologize. He is Irish. This story was written in 1923. It takes place in Dublin, Ireland in the 1920s. Now, something important that you need to understand about Ireland, Ireland did have a sort of civil war in the 20s, and they had a lot of upheaval at the time because the Irish Republicans wanted independence from England. And the Free Staters, so there were two groups, the Republicans and the Free Staters, they wanted Ireland to govern themselves but stay joined with England. So you had one group that wanted to have nothing to do with England. They wanted Ireland all to themselves. They didn't want to have any association with England. But then you had the other group, which are the Free Staters, that still wanted to govern Ireland on their own, but they still wanted to be associated or in a part of have some sort of treaty or understanding with England. They still wanted to work with England. So what happened, these two groups, the Irish Republicans and the Free Staters, clashed with one another and a war was started. So we are going to begin the story here. The long June twilight faded into night. Dublin lay enveloped in darkness, but for the dim light of the moon that shone through fleecy clouds, casting a pale light as an approaching dawn over the streets and the dark waters of the Liffey. Around the beleaguered four courts, the heavy guns roared. Here and there throughout the city, machine guns and rifles broke the silence of the night spasmodically, like dogs barking on lone farms. Republicans and Free Staters were waging civil war. On a rooftop near O'Connell Bridge, a Republican sniper lay watching. Beside him lay his rifle, and over his shoulders was slung a pair of field glasses. His face was the face of a student, thin and ascetic, but his eyes had the cold gleam of the fanatic. They were deep and thoughtful, the eyes of a man who is used to looking at death. He was eating a sandwich hungrily. He'd eaten nothing since morning. He had been too excited to eat. He finished the sandwich and, taking a flask of whiskey from his pocket, he took a short draught. Then he returned the flask to his pocket. He paused for a moment, considering whether he should risk a smoke. It was dangerous. The flash might be seen in the darkness, and there were enemies watching. He decided to take the risk. Placing a cigarette between his lips, he struck a match, inhaled the smoke hurriedly, and put out the light. Almost immediately, a bullet flattened itself against the parapet of the roof. The sniper took another whiff and put out the cigarette. Then he swore softly and crawled away to the left. Cautiously, he raised himself and peered over the parapet. There was a flash and a bullet whizzed over his head. He dropped immediately. He had seen the flash. It came from the opposite side of the street. He rolled over the roof to a chimney stack in the rear and slowly drew himself up behind it until his eyes were level with the top of the parapet. There was nothing to be seen, just the dim outline of the opposite housetop against the blue sky. His enemy was under cover. Just then, an armored car came from across the bridge and advanced slowly up the street. It stopped on the opposite side of the street, 50 yards ahead. The sniper could hear the dull panting of the motor. His heart beat faster. It was an enemy car. He wanted to fire, but he knew it was useless. His bullets would never pierce the steel that covered the gray monster. Then, round the corner of a side street came an old woman, her head covered by a tattered shawl. She began to talk to the man in the turret of the car. She was pointing to the roof where the sniper lay. An informer. The turret opened. A man's head and shoulders appeared, looking toward the sniper. The sniper raised his rifle and fired. The head fell heavily on the turret wall. The woman darted toward the side street. The sniper fired again. The woman whirled around and fell with a shriek into the gutter. Suddenly, from the opposite roof, a shot rang out, and the sniper dropped his rifle with a curse. The rifle clattered to the roof. The sniper thought the noise would wake the dead. He stooped to pick the rifle up. He couldn't lift it. His forearm was dead. "I'm hit," he muttered. Dropping flat onto the roof, he crawled back to the parapet. With his left hand, he felt the injured right forearm. The blood was oozing through the sleeve of his coat. There was no pain, just a deadened sensation, as if the arm had been cut off. Quickly, he drew his knife from his pocket, opened it on the breastwork of the parapet, and ripped open the sleeve. There was a small hole where the bullet had entered. On the other side, there was no hole. The bullet had lodged in the bone. It must have fractured it. He bent the arm below the wound. The arm bent back easily, and he ground his teeth to overcome the pain. Then, taking out his field dressing, he ripped open the packet with his knife. He broke the neck of the iodine bottle and let the bitter fluid drip onto the wound. A paroxysm of pain swept through him. He placed the cotton wadding over the wound and wrapped the dressing over it. He tied the ends with his teeth. Then he lay still against the parapet, and closing his eyes, he made an effort of will to overcome the pain. In the street beneath, all was still. The armored car had retired speedily over the bridge, with the machine gunner's head hanging lifeless over the turret. The woman's corpse lay still in the gutter. The sniper lay still for a long time, nursing his wounded arm and planning escape. Morning must not find him wounded on the roof. The enemy on the opposite roof covered his escape. He must kill that enemy, and he could not use his rifle. He had only a revolver to do it. Then he thought of a plan. Taking off his cap, he placed it over the muzzle of his rifle. Then he pushed the rifle slowly upward over the parapet until the cap was visible from the opposite side of the street. Almost immediately there was a report, and a bullet pierced the center of the cap. The sniper slanted the rifle forward. The cap clipped down into the street. Then, catching the rifle in the middle, the sniper dropped his left hand over the roof and let it hang lifelessly. After a few moments, he let the rifle drop to the street. Then he sank to the roof, dragging his hand with him. Crawling quickly to his feet, he peered up at the corner of the roof. His ruse had succeeded. The other sniper, seeing the cap and rifle fall, thought he had killed his man. He was now standing before a row of chimney pots, looking across with his head clearly silhouetted against the western sky. The Republican sniper smiled and lifted his revolver above the edge of the parapet. The distance was about 50 yards, a hard shot in the dim light, and his right arm was paining him like 1,000 devils. He took a steady aim. His hand trembled with eagerness. Pressing his lips together, he took a deep breath through his nostrils and fired. He was almost deafened with the report, and his arm shook with the recoil. Then, when the smoke cleared, he peered across and uttered a cry of joy. His enemy had been hit. He was reeling over the parapet in his death agony. He struggled to keep his feet, but he was slowly falling forward as if in a dream. The rifle fell from his grasp, hit the parapet, fell over, bounded off the pole of the barber shop beneath, and then clattered on the pavement. Then the dying man on the roof crumpled up and fell forward. The body turned over and over in space and hit the ground with a dull thud. Then it lay still. The sniper looked at his enemy falling, and he shuddered. The lust of battle died in him. He became bitten by remorse. The sweat stood out in beads on his forehead, and weakened by his wound and the long summer day of fasting and watching on the roof, he revolted from the sight of the shattered mass of his dead enemy. His teeth chattered. He began to gibber to himself, cursing the war, cursing himself, cursing everybody. He looked at the smoking revolver in his hand, and with an oath he hurled it at the roof, off the roof at his feet. Then the revolver went off with a concussion, and the billet whizzed past the sniper's head. He was frightened back to his senses by the shock. His nerves steadied. The cloud of fear scattered from his mind, and he laughed. Taking the whiskey flask from his pocket, he emptied at a draught. He felt reckless under the influence of the spirit, and he decided to leave the roof now and look for his company commander to report. Everywhere around was quiet. There was not much danger in going through the streets. He picked up his revolver and put it in his pocket. Then he crawled down through the skylight to the house underneath. When the sniper reached the laneway on the street level, he felt a sudden curiosity as to the identity of the enemy's sniper whom he had killed. He decided that he was a good shot, whoever he was. He wondered, did he know him? Perhaps he had been in his own company before the split in the army. He decided to risk going over to have a look at him. He peered around the corner into O'Connell Street. In the upper part of the street there was heavy firing, but around here all was quiet. The sniper darted across the street. A machine gun tore up the ground around him with a hail of bullets, but he escaped. He threw himself face downward beside the corpse. The machine gun stopped. Then the sniper turned over the dead body and looked into his brother's face. So let's talk about the plot elements of The Sniper. Our exposition. It was set in Dublin, Ireland during the Civil War. We have the characters. We've got the sniper and his enemies, and later on we know his brother. And then the conflict. The conflict is that the sniper must carry out his mission without being killed. So he's trying to kill his enemies and keep himself from being killed. So our rising action. We have the sniper. The sniper lights a cigarette, which gives away his location. That's one event. And he gets shot at. Then an informer arrives, an old woman. She's an informer, or if you want to call her a snitch. She arrives and points out the sniper's location. The sniper then kills the driver of the armored car and he kills the woman, but he gets shot himself and he can't pick up his rifle. He can't hold his gun to shoot at the other sniper. He patches his wound while he thinks of a way to kill his enemy and a way to escape. So then we have our climax. The sniper tricks his enemy into thinking he is dead. And once the enemy exposes himself, the sniper goes ahead and takes out his revolver and shoots the enemy. The enemy falls off the building to the ground below. That's our climax. We saw the sniper coming up with this plan. We didn't know if the plan was going to work, but then it did, and he was able to shoot his enemy. So our falling action. The sniper emerges from his hiding place and hurries to see who the enemy was. He wondered if he knew him. He also avoids getting shot. So there's a machine gun that started going off and he dives to the ground. Once the machine gun stops, he turns over the body of his fallen enemy. And that brings us to the resolution. The sniper discovers the true identity of his target. He has shot and killed his brother. Now we kind of went from, our climax, which is a moment of greatest tension, back down, decreasing tension, and then you have this shock of a resolution where he realizes he has shot and killed his brother. So let's talk about what type of conflict this was. This had an external conflict. So there were matters outside of the sniper's self. So he wasn't conflicted within himself, but the conflict came from outside of him. So we have the Civil War. That is the major conflict, the war between the Irish Republicans and the Free Staters. And the sniper also has to avoid being killed. So that's another conflict that he has to overcome. You could also say that this conflict is man versus man and society versus man. So we have the brothers going against each other. They both are fighting for opposite sides, and they attempt to kill one another, and the sniper does kill his brother. But we also have society versus man. So we have society going against each other. If it weren't for this war, I'm sure that the sniper wouldn't have killed his brother, and they would have had a fine life. But because of the way that society was disagreeing with one another, and society started a war, it now put society versus the sniper versus man. So he's fighting against an idea and for other people.